Okay, so welcome. Hello. Welcome. Trying to see if we can do a little bit of a volume check. Okay, I see it moving. Perfect. Last time we had an issue with the sound. Welcome to Legally Everywhere, where we are what? We are legally everywhere. We are legally everywhere. We are looking into everything. Okay. I got a little bit of a presentation for you. All right, let me pull this screen down because, baby, what is happening? They done gave you all the goods when it wasn't supposed to. My computer has been moving exceptionally slow today, so I switched to the other one, and that one's moving slower. So I do apologize for those few minutes while we wait for everybody to get in here. Oh, this is moving incredibly slow. All right. Oh, wow. Okay, y'all, we're going to do this one more time. Why they always want to do me like this, right, y'all? Why they want to do me like that? Y'all see how I put together this lovely presentation for y'all. But anywho, okay, so while I wait for this to load up, I wanted to talk about the significance of how power actually works and how the money is moving. So then everything that we've been seeing, it actually makes so much more sense once I can actually break down some of the relevant things that have been going on, because current events have been completely, and when I say completely out of pocket, stuff has really been out of pocket as of late. And I said, let me go look into some things. Let me do a little bit of research so we can get into this, because y'all know how I am. We got to get into these receipts. So although y'all have a few videos from me that I've been uploading, and you have several shorts, I thought it would be really significant if I just gave you one concise place that you can go to look for information relevant to the relationship between the United States and Venezuela, because honestly, it gets juicy. These receipts are quite succulent. And when I say that, I mean like, oh, there is so much going on. Like, this is not just like current events. This is really like decades in the making. There are so many cautionary tale situations involved. I was able to do a little bit of mapping so we can see some things relevant to Project 25. We'll get a little bit more understanding about currency. So yeah, I want you to buckle in real quick. I'm not gonna have you long. But I did want to have you long enough so that we can explain some of the things that are actually going on, because wow, I was looking into this and a couple of other things, which I'll do some videos on probably early next week or maybe this weekend. But yeah, let's jump into this. Okay, so what we're going to be discussing is Venezuela, the sanctions, because sanctions happened a couple of times throughout the course of the time frame that we're going to be reviewing. Happened a few times, okay? Because we have a section we're going to call the sanction era, and then we have just some of the stuff that was happening before, which made movements for them a little bit uncomfortable. So we'll discuss that, and like I said, we're going to talk about currency. We're going to jump into this governance. So I hope you're able to stay tuned. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll jump back and forth between the PowerPoint section so I can answer anything that y'all may have real time. But I'm super excited for us to jump into this. Okay. Let me pull up. so I can see the slide just a little bit before y'all see it. Okay, so we're gonna talk kind of about the oil, the power, and the currency, right? And why I really feel like the conversation about, is it oil, right? Is it about oil? Is really, it's the wrong question. I'm not gonna say it's not a part of the equation. It's just the wrong question. It's the wrong question because we gotta get into these receipts. Okay, so as I've been saying, right, the past shapes the future. And when you're kind of looking at this, you got to understand that you have decades, and when I mean decades, worth of decisions, alliances, conflicts, issues, administrations involved in what you're seeing happen in present day. And that's something you always kind of keep in your mind, right? Throughout the time frame that I'm gonna be on this live with y'all, I just want to put out there that oil is that girl. And when you kind of are able to put your mind through the lens of oil is that girl, and that Venezuela was sitting on one of the largest assets of oil or procurements of oil, you understand a lot about what's going on, right? Oil is that girl. So Venezuela has the oil, but they don't necessarily have the influence and power over the oil, right? So you assume because they have the oil, they have the wealth, but that's not necessarily the case. You think that would be the case, but it's not once you see how all these pieces kind of go into place. And it makes certain things start to make sense. So I'm going to try to move through this chronologically. There'll be a couple of moments where I'll foreshadow a few things, but I will move through this chronologically so that it makes sense. That's why I said I wanted to do a history section. Okay. So, Venezuela hosts the largest proven oil reserves, right? So we also know that there are other places that might have oil that may not want to share, that knowledge because of all the things that go along with having oil literally in your backyard, right? They have so many books and movies about like the stress that really comes, not just from saying I have it, but the amount of people that want to take it from you and like the means and measures in which places take to do it, right? I have traveled places in my life, and I've met people and they're like, oh yeah, they know it's oil in their backyard, but they say they don't want to bring that kind of stress to their village. So literally, that community of people decided they weren't going to mention it, at all. That was over a decade ago. But like, it's very interesting the experiences that people have relevant to that. So just once again, keep in mind that there's a lot of politics, lots of experiences that go with the idea of having oil literally in your backyard. So kind of keeping that in mind, right? They have the oil, but there are foreign bodies that are going to kind of come in and start to govern certain things. And that plays a factor because they have the asset, but not necessarily the access to get in the room so they can move the stuff, right? So you got to think there's like a middleman, so to speak, that kind of comes to the room to help them, let's say, with this contract. And then what ends up happening is you got to kind of think they invite someone to come in, help them kind of move the stuff so they can get this asset out into the community. But then the people who's supposed to be helping them move it, they kind of moving the money in a way where it don't look right to them. And that's what we're going to start to kind of navigate what that journey kind of looks like, and keep it in mind because they didn't necessarily have the plug or this connection that helped them be able to move into these rooms. Also made sure that they couldn't just move into those rooms without them. Okay, keep that part in mind. Also wanted to say, just from a historical perspective, although I start this around like the 90s, um, in general, when I do dive into things, I typically can go from the 90s to present day because I feel like that's a nice amount of time to chunk, but relevant to where I felt like the story really kind of peaked. Um, this is going to be like pre, you know, let's just like let's say 1990s, right? And also kind of focusing in on the fact that the oil industry nationalized in the 70s, right? But I think it's really important that we kind of focus in on like some of the foreign bodies that came in, specifically ExxonMobil, because there will be some things that happen with them. Like there's a whole legal thing that happens with them, and it's really interesting where I start asking governance questions. But just keep in mind, the oil belongs to Venezuela on paper and like on the tangible side, right? Like it's literally in their backyard. But power over pricing, extraction terms, like profit margin, distribution, all of that, because of the way that things got structured, was on an external agency, right? So they're getting less advantageous, benefits from the deal, literally, because another agency is in and they get to control all the major pieces surrounding their asset. So as wealth begins to flow like outward, right? Inequality is something that they're experiencing inwardly. So let's make this more concise, right? Let's say you have, let's say bubble gum. You have bubble gum. It's something that you have access to. You know how to make it. You know how to do everything. You got all these resources. But you don't have connections to larger companies so that you can distribute it out to bigger places. Like you, like, I want my gum in all the stores across the United States, right? But you only so far been making bubble gum at your local school, right? You know someone who can get you in the rooms, but you're going to have to compensate them to be able to get into the room. They say, oh no, we're going to look out. We're going to make sure you're okay, right? You're like, okay, cool. I wouldn't otherwise be able to get into rooms. Of course, I appreciate that you're able to help me get the resources so that I can produce more of this, so that I can do it quicker in a more efficient way, so that I can be in the rooms I normally couldn't walk into. And you're my connection, you're my plug. You might, like, say, be the middleman, right? You're going to be compensated for your time and your effort, but within reason, right? So the way that it looks when you look at all the paperwork and look at all the writings, the external bodies got the majority of the profits. They had the majority of the control, although Venezuela had the actual access. Operationally, they had control. Resource-wise, they had control, and that's where some of the issue starts to come in. So as all that's going on, it's like I'm surrounded by wealth, but I don't benefit from it, right? How am I surrounded by riches? How do I have one of the hot commodities? Oil is the hot girl. You need oil for like pretty much everything, right? And you'll find later that it has a big portion of conversation relevant to currency, right? So we'll see, right? Once again, it is the hot girl, and you have this resource, this asset, but you're not able to what? You're not able to fully benefit from it. So you have questions. You feel some type of way. Okay. So that kind of concept. So that brings us into the ideology of what's going on. Okay. So those kind of conditions were, whoa, it just jumped us up, huh? That's not right. It moved us up one. I know I don't like that. Okay, let's get it shows us everything but 5, right? Okay. So this kind of condition, right, where they're like, man, I had this money, right? I had this resource, the conditions, right? So back to the oil. Like I said, it's the hot girl. Kind of reminds you of the 90s, right? That let's same exact time period, right? Let's give you another analogy, right? Um, you think about R&B groups. I'm gonna speak with R&B groups, and you think back to the 90s. They have this asset, right? They have this skill, this talent, asset. The artists themselves, right? I'm a musical artist. I sing, I dance, or I'm a type of entertainer. I have what a management team or these people that I'm putting on my team to help me manage to get me in the room so I can sing to the people who need to hear me sing, right? Or see me perform. We watch several, not just one music group. We watch several artists, even different genres, but we're going to focus in on the R&B ones. I think this reference will hit for some people. We watch them perform and show tours sold out. We watched number one albums, all this stuff, and then they went on national television and told us they were broke. Like, what do you mean you're broke? You have no money. We see you everywhere doing everything. How do you have no money? Well, when your management team is responsible for all the operational things, right? You're just doing the talent piece, but they're controlling the business, right? I'm not putting you in the rooms with somebody else who can potentially have you undercut me. I'm, spending the money in whatever ways I see fit, right? People have tested skimming money even, right? They're doing lots of things with the money, right? Some for good, maybe some not so much. But whatever is happening, you find that despite you having this asset, despite all the work and effort that you're putting to make sure that asset is doing what it's supposed to do and function the way that you feel like it ought to the best of your ability, you find that you don't have money. You don't have the wealth. You're like, look at this. I have this talent. How can I be broke? So similar to that, the actual thing which we're talking about, right? How can you be surrounded by this asset, this oil, this wealth, but yet you don't benefit from the wealth? The everyday Venezuelan was, not able to benefit from the wealth that they were surrounded by. And keep in mind, the ground, the earth, that's theirs, right? Their land. They were not able to benefit from it. Officials were able to benefit from it. Elites were able to benefit from it. Foreign bodies were able to benefit from it, but they were not able to benefit. So that had inward equality built up in them. You feel some type of way when you feel jaded, when you feel like, hey, I trusted you to do this a certain kind of way, and it's not working out that way. So that's prime condition, the prime condition for Chavez coming in, right? Because you've seen his picture on the cover. I wanted to make sure I kind of followed some of the history there. So when you have stuff like that going on, you will always have someone, no matter where you are. That's just my dog. I almost scared my dog half to death. I keep dropping pens. So I know I like stuff in my hands. But you'll find that people will campaign around that, right? There's always going to be someone in the world to say, you know what? This inequality is happening and we need to fix this. I can fix it. We will make this better, right? Right? Okay. So no confusion about that piece. My apologies. But when you have like economic inequality, there's always going to be someone who pops up and says, look, I'm put this on my back. I got this. I'm going to fix this. And from what I read about the struggles, right? Reasonably so, you will want someone to kind of rise up and say, hey, let's fix this. Because the everyday person is experiencing, they're experiencing discomfort. They don't, resources are limited. They're promised a lot of things. A lot of times people come in for projects, you know, they promise you all kinds of things, right? We call that lip service. They promise you all the good stuff. Yeah, you know, they have what I've heard married couples call like a honey-do list. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna do this, honey, do this, honey, that. You know, all these things they're going to do, right? They butter you up like a biscuit, and then they leave you out there dry like a cracker, right? And it's unfortunate. I don't know if you ever had super saltine dry crackers, but like that kind of deal. It's unpleasant, right? You end up eating a sip of water from the thirst and deprivation you are left with, right? So kind of having that in your mind, surrounded by wealth, but all these other entities, outside bodies, are benefiting from something that you're on, and that made people angry, and then there became a issue, right? Because a lot of, I say, one of the largest benefiters, you would say one of the larger companies, not the only, but one of the largest was like ExxonMobil, and that was US aligned. So that kind of caused some issues too. And there was some involvement with regards to like the US, with regards to policy and how that affected certain things for them. So just once again, keeping that mindset of people feeling robbed. So that emotional, environmental, climate is how I interpret made it more comfortable for people to actually elect Chavez into office. So Hugo Chavez, he was officially, as I say, appropriately elected in 19. Look, I got on here, so 98. But some of the other stuff that you hear about him and his regime comes later. Okay, comes later. So he's democratically elected, right? Popular vote. And his campaign was mostly on national sovereignty over resources and redistribution of oil revenue, right? Once again, he campaigned and he ran on the fact of what? We gonna get this fixed up. They're not gonna do us like this. And a structure that would benefit the everyday citizen rather than just the elites, right? Rather than just the elites. And through that lens, just keep in mind that he's democratically elected and constitutionally it's like a legitimate like election, because I read some different things, but it was a democratic procedure. The authoritarian elements, that shift comes after. So I thought it was significant to mention that as we move through this, right? I just wanted to mention that because, that's a piece of the puzzle. Okay, so now we get to the turning point. Let's start with everything starting to get real juicy. So the populist to authoritarian, right? It's once he got into power, right? He started expanding presidential authority and concentrating like decision making on the executive branch. This in my mind, where I'm gonna tell you, I put a tag. This is where we start to move into cautionary tale, and also we start to see some similarities with other things that are happening in modern day. It's crazy to say modern day, and now it's just the 90s. But we start to see an expansion of executive power. Okay, we start to see expansion of executive power. Right? Then we start to what next? We start to see a weakening in checks and balances, right? Now they had a democratic structure at that particular point in time. This person was democratically elected in. So keep it in mind. A weakening of the checks and balances. From the U.S. centric, right, or U.S. perspective, our checks and balances would be what? The executive branch, the legislative branch, which would be like Congress in it, and then we have what? Our Supreme Court. So our courts, those will be our three checks and balances to make sure everything moves like how it's supposed to be. But they had a weakening in their checks and balance system, right? And unfortunately, some things occur as a byproduct of that. Then what do we have? Next, the third thing we have is a constitutional restructuring. The government rewrote constitutional structures to legitimize centralized control, right? While framing opposition as a foreign-backed enemy of the, as they call their revolution. Okay? So that's why I say this is somewhat becoming a cautionary tale, because some of these things are starting to seem a little familiar. Okay, a little familiar. So what initially started off as an elected democratic process, procedure, and situation moved into authoritarianism. I want you to see that very clearly, because I feel like sometimes people get uncomfortable when you start making parallels, but you have to be able to distinguish the difference between apples and oranges. If it's apples and apples, or apples and oranges, if it's pears, mangoes, or whatever, you need to be able to distinguish that this is the same or this is different, and this is why it is different. But when things are similar, it's similar, right? So history is history, and we must pay attention to it. So now we're talking about that turning point, right? There was the time frame in 2002 where there was a reported coup attempt and U.S. involvement. So keep it in mind, anytime you start talking about a coup happening, right? Everything is changed now. When you feel like people doing, shady, sly things, right? Or you like, hey, why y'all, moving and doing that, and you trying to act like you didn't do it, that's always going to put a nasty taste in somebody's mouth if that is their perspective as to what happened, right? So it raised questions once again about external influences, and we know that they've already had somewhat the taste of vinegar in their mouth about external influences relevant to the history that they had, a decade plus of dealing with, right? So what ends up happening is the person who runs the opposition of Chavez at the time, they reported that this person received some support from multiple sources, being one of them being the U.S., right? And they felt like they was getting funding. And, they felt some type of way about that. So we'll see this name come back up later, but Maria Corina Machado was involved in the opposition activism. And we know that she's received many awards, even more recently, another Peace Prize. There'll be a piece that I'm going to jump into about that a little bit later. It's very interesting about how that one wasn't publicized as much. Like you didn't see like an actual installation with it being laid on the body. Like it was very interesting. I did look into it because of all the kind of things that have been happening relevant to it. But to stay on topic with the timeline, the National Endowment for Democracy funded various Venezuelan groups, right? Although we must acknowledge, while I'm speaking of the U.S., denied direct involvement in the coup itself, right? But here's how I think it's important. You don't have to say, I'm affiliated, right? We have things modern day, right? People wear a hat like, hey, I'm affiliated with this. You don't always have to do that. You don't have to say, I went to the concert, got the t-shirt, got the hat, got the lanyard, whatever. You don't have to do that. You do not have to wear items of affiliation or association to be affiliated or associated, to be involved, right? Sometimes it's funding. Sometimes it's a grant. Sometimes it's me putting money behind you so you can get in the rooms that you couldn't get in before. Because you're like, hey, I would love to go up against this person, but I don't got the money. I would love to campaign for a position, but I don't got the money. I don't got the financial backing. It costs X amount of dollars to run a campaign for said position. I don't have that accessible. A person might say, well, what are you trying to do? I think that could suit other needs that maybe I have. I would like to support you. Or maybe I see that I need this other person out that position. So I feel like maybe you'd be better for whatever reason. Sometimes it looks like I got your back because I'm putting money on you. So I'm at your 6. I got your back. Oh, no worries. You want to get in that room? I'm going to make sure the money is accessible so you can get in that room. And you can move how you need to. As long as you need to do what we need you to do. But there also might be things I'm asking you to do because I'm funding you. And that becomes a part of conversations. I always say, if somebody's funding somebody, how much did they pay them? Why did they pay them? What did they promise them? What are they going to get out of it? These are questions that we all, as constituents, generally want to know. Now, in this situation, I'm not a constituent of this particular body, but in general, I always say it's important for us to ask those kind of questions because they help inform certain things on the back end. You know what I'm saying? So let's move to the next piece, the oil renationalization, right? And this is where it really gets interesting, right? So Chavez was able to make some movements there, right? Like the way that the oil was being carried. He said, we're going to move these deals. We've got to switch this stuff all up. We're going to make sure that, my people get their money. My people as my constituents, the people who elected me, people put me in or whatever. So he kind of made some movements, right? And what happened when the repositioning occurred, foreign bodies who were mostly benefiting from the relationship that they had, because keep in mind, it was more, let's say, appetizing to a foreign body because let's say they're getting the majority of the benefits, proceeds, the money, the power, the leverage. And the everyday, Venezuelan was not able to have that benefit. So this foreign body, now that they're saying, no, we're going to take a bigger piece of this, cut of this money. This money been moving real funny. I do not like it. We finna change this up. We're definitely going to have to adjust the way that this is positioned. And ExxonMobil, as we mentioned before, was one of those parties. So they went from being a majority beneficiary to being a minority. Anytime you had that switch, you always going to have some discomfort. So they said they wouldn't happen there, right? Because not only were they losing like operational control, but you keep in mind, to lose that control means they lost leverage and they're actually losing tangible dollars, a lot, right? A lot of money. Another thing that they did was they kind of did some sanctions and stuff. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that right next, but it was very, very interesting. So what ended up happening that I found very significant was ExxonMobil ended up suing, right? So the international arbitration, they won $1.4 billion in compensation, right? But here's where I felt like it was super important, right? Like if you're a sovereign nation and it's your asset, it's your resource, who gonna make you run them the money? Who's gonna make you pay that $1.4 billion in compensation to ExxonMobil? Who's gonna make you pay it? You know what I'm saying? Because you're sovereign, it's your resource. Like, who gonna make you do it? Like, who do you have to answer to make you pay it? Okay, so that's a governance question. But it was, once again, very interesting to read how all that played out. So this is like 2007-ish, right? 2007-ish, right? And we think about what happened even in like the U.S. economy, around that time, like immediately following that time frame, relevant to money, and it starts to make sense when I start talking about how oil is what that girl. It's the it girl. Okay, so also keeping in mind, I just want to say, like, when we talk about how severe it got, when they got into it with their previous, like, let's say middleman, right? The person's controlling your operations, you get into it with them. what's going to happen? You're going to mess up the production. Your money going to get real, real funny because they're like, hold on, I'm about to let you benefit off of, my connections, my plugs and all this. So now that people are controlling operations, they probably not going to do their job because they don't feel like they're getting the right kind of money. But they're also losing. So it's like everybody's kind of, to a degree, probably operating in a way that's not really helpful for either one of them because they don't want the other person to get more. But inadvertently, I feel like everybody got a little bit less. Now, what I found interesting at that time, what I could find said that they were getting about 3 million at the peak, which is a previous peak, which would be like a barrels per day. So let's say 3 million or whatever. But now I think they say currently it's under 1 million barrels per day. So even much later, they still weren't able to reach where they were, you know what I'm saying, during their peak, right? So that's very significant. But you must keep in mind when we're talking about production and operational elements being caught off guard, you have to think the whole infrastructure was basically kind of structured around a whole external body that no longer wants to do. So you got to think, if you're not paying technical experts, your subject matter experts, your production, you need to have tools and equipment in place. Anybody who has operated, Boog, are you okay? It's my little Frenchie. Okay. So anytime you are operating anything, right? Like whether you had a home or you have a car or anything, you know that it takes money to make money. What? Dollar bill, y'all. It takes money to make money, right? So if you don't have the money, the bankroll to maintain maintenance takes up so much money. When you have something, right, you got to pay to keep it up. If you don't have that, you're going to be in this position. If you can't pay the people to make sure that you can have efficient processes, because sometimes you need to cut costs. Sometimes certain resources that you maybe needed back in the day, you don't need now, or maybe you need more because it's older machinery, right? All of that plays a factor. All of it plays a factor. And that's something to kind of keep in mind as well. The machinery is been constantly working, so either it might need to be repaired, fixed. How much lifetime do you get out of it? All these elements. Then you got to think about budgets. Oh my goodness, corporations, companies, and budgets. People siphon off the money. Regardless, even in some of the most ideal settings, I'm sure there's still some level of funny practices, right? Less than standard accounting practices that are probably happening, or people are siphoning off the money. And, literally, there were other elements too. Like, if I'm controlling the operational pieces, you think I'm about to connect you to somebody who's going to allow you to have access to the money systems? Absolutely not. So you're being blocked out of situations where you could go to somebody else and like, okay, I need this money so that we can make this stuff work, so that we can continue to produce at the rate that we need to, so we can match with the demands that are out there. Because right now our supply is low, so we're not going to meet demands. Now we're talking economics, right? Which we've really been talking about, but I want to further put that out there. I'm going to block you out of access to the money systems that would support you being able to get the production at the rate that you need it to be at, so that you can buy smooth. Great. Then you got to keep in mind they end up having other sanctions and things that were happening internationally that blocked them and restricted their access to what? Technology, spare parts, general investments, which further basically strangulated them. And it's just like, you think about your whole operations being put in a chokehold. Such active language, right? But literally think your whole business is, just going at you like that. That's going to make stuff really difficult. making this already hard as is. People already know budgets get funny as is, but now you literally have them, all your resources. You know, now you're like, okay, well, can I connect to somebody else? Blocked. You know what I mean? They snatching and blocking everything. So you really can't move. And on top of that, they trying to sue you for the other money too, you know? So that's probably was a strategy within itself, but you know, that's a lot to be happening all at the same exact time. All at the same exact time. So, oh, wait a minute. Oh. Okay. So Maduro takes office, right? So now we all the way up to 2013. Maduro takes office because, we'll put it this way. So Chavez died in 2013, right? And Nicolas Maduro assumed power. And unlike his predecessor, right? You know, he inherited, it seemed like a lot, right? Because everything was this is what he's inheriting, right? Now, what's interesting, I find, is his leadership style. It very, very much seems like he really drove into that authoritarianism element very, very deeply. And within that, I'm going to say this is where stuff really starts to become a cautionary tale. It starts to become a cautionary tale because the story kind of began with people having a grievance and a concern, right? Frustration over oil sovereignty, you know, and wanting to feel like they get a fair shake. You know what I'm saying? Like, give us our propers. Like, you know, give us what is fair, especially when it's our resource. And, you know, like we ask you, just help us move in the room, right? It just turned into something really kind of like dark. Like, it's truly a cautionary tale about what happens to like legitimate grievances, right? Because we all have grievances to a degree, right? No matter what country you come in. And thank you all for the 30% of my community here that's international, right? We all have grievances, right? But what happens when someone weaponizes your grievance, your pain, you know, your discomfort? And when they weaponize it to like justify authoritarianism, right? And like, who corrects that? You know what I'm saying? Like, when is that ever justification for oppression? And like, where do you draw the line, and who exactly draws the line? Now, we will later go into stuff about the UN and all that kind of stuff. Another video, I won't keep y'all that long. I'm gonna be wrapping this up pretty soon. But like, the question I think is so fundamental, and it becomes like the governance question. Who gets to step in? Who gets to decide how you're supposed to move with that? Because it's a valid question. Like, if someone's using your grievances, they're weaponizing your grievance to like consolidate power. Who should be stepping in to say something or do something? Under what authority, right? Under what authority? So then that transitions us into like the sanction era, which happened between 2015 to 2017, right? And we had stuff that was happening under multiple United administrations, right? So President Barack Obama in 2015 signed an executive order. We're gonna be jumping into some executive orders later, trust me, throughout the channel. But during that executive order, he declared Venezuelans to be an unusual and extraordinary threat, right, to the U.S. national security. Keep that in mind. 2 years later, under the Trump administration, right, he expanded sanctions pretty aggressively, targeting oil sales, banking systems, and international shipping networks, right? That's under Trump's administration, his previous term. And then we see some of the things that have been happening with right now. These weren't like symbolic gestures. This is like literally, once again, what did I say? Like, it's like choking somebody out, you know? It's economic warfare. It's designed to further isolate them from global financial systems. We already talked about before how it was kind of getting blocked out. It was like, this is like a full blown, like, yeah, you're not making any moves unless we say so. And it makes you wonder why even take that posture, right? Because you labeled them as a security threat. Then you had like more restrictions, more things, expansions like 2 years later. And it's a full-blown target, like boom, boom, boom. And you got to wonder, like, why? Why do that, right? Why do that? So we had the return of Maria Corina Machado, right? And I think this is super important to acknowledge, right, the opposition politics. It was very important, in my opinion, to talk about what internally was going on so that we can understand what is happening internationally and then what is happening within a relationship. This is all from the lens of relationships. It was very interesting, and you'll find that this particular person has received numerous awards relevant to some of their advocacy work. And even more recently, a Nobel Peace Prize, which I said I would bring back up. I found it very interesting. I was looking to see like where they had the gold medal put on them, and I was looking for a speech. And what you generally would find when it comes to Nobel Peace Prize, I did not find for her. So initially, when I was reporting, I'm like, I can't find any of these things, but I did do deeper digging because I'm like, too many places are reporting this, but I'm not seeing the right kind of reports. So if you do go on the Nobel Peace Prize, although it's not public, presented the way that it normally would be, it is there. There isn't a speech. Her daughter went and provided. She was not actually at the ceremony, and then her daughter did a speech on her behalf. So that's why you don't see some of the things you would normally see. You don't have the images and all of that. But I was able to get the image that is more like a representative of her having an award that she gave to President Trump, which I put as the cover page for this video. But yeah, so that is present. And I wanted to kind of bring that up. There was once again what external support happening from like the U.S., right? So publicly endorsed by American conservative politicians and policymakers. So once again, we know that there's been some feelings here and there about external supports. And at this particular time, we saw that. But keep in mind, there was a period where this person is being barred from even being able to hold public office. But, you know, they are getting support, you know, from the U.S. And then now we see what's happening in the current time, right? Just to give some of that out there. So after giving y'all that foundation, right, if somebody is saying that oil is not a part of this conversation, you can tell them, I know you lying, because no. 100% oil is that girl. And Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserve. So if they have the oil, and oil is that girl, oil is the big money tank. Like, it's big bank tank, little bank. It is leverage. It is power. It is asset. It's resource, right? And they're sitting on a whole bunch of it. There's leverage automatically. If it were only about oil, though, right? We know the conversation will end right here. This will be it. This will be done with PowerPoint. She's done. But that's not the case. That's not the case. So you know it's deeper. You know it's deeper. So the dollar, right? Because the U.S. has such, let's say, control operationally speaking, over the oil itself, right? They control how it moved, how it was priced, all the pieces, right? Because oil's what the it girl. You're going to have to put the oil in my form of currency. You're going to have to put it in my money, which is US dollars. So the oil was put in US dollars, which means anytime oil's in the room, you got to talk to me, because what is my money? It's my currency. You either got to invite me to that table. That's leverage. That is power. Power is leverage, right? Okay. So if you got to put everything in US dollars, if you want to get oil, you got to put it in US dollars, right? That automatically makes the demand for US dollars go up, even if it's not necessarily there. Not to say that it wouldn't be there, but it automatically inflates the need, the value, and the weight of the US dollar, right? Right? So let's say, and for a nation that openly discusses having a exuberant amount of debt, right? Knowing that you got to convert your money into my money, irregardless of that, is a move for me. It's a power play. It's leverage. It is leverage. If I walk into a room and I'm like, look, I have, let's say, a Lambo, right? I got this car, pew, pew, Fast and Furious. You're not going to question, do I really got the money for the Lambo? Because you see me with it. I got the power and the play and the moves. I'm like, hey, everything that I need already been verified by somebody. You don't ask if it's rented, leased, or otherwise, right? You just, it's there. But realistically speaking, right, that's all really based off leverage and power. All that's based off leverage and power. So I just want to kind of explain that petrodollar dynamic, because I think that's super important to understand, because now it makes more sense why they're going like head up and back and forth the way that they're going at it. Because a lot of what we say with regards to our money and our power and our influence is based off the weight of the US dollar, saying our dollar is top dollar. We that hot girl, we that right? You're it, but you're it because of the what? Some of the assets that made it what it is. So some of that control over what? The oil. Because oil is what? Oil is the it girl. So here's where things start to get interesting. It starts to get interesting. This enters BRICS. This is where we start talking about the money. BRICS is, we'll just put it this way. It is being discussed as a direct threat to the dollar monopoly in the global trade, right? So it's an alternate. It's literally an alternative system for how the money can move. It's not associated with the Western system for which we have been accustomed, right? Because they're not requiring the use of the US dollar, right? So it threatens the system, right? And that's where it gets interesting. And this is not just the 5 systems you was thinking before. They have 10 full members and like 9 partners. So that's a lot of agencies, just to put that out there as well. That's a lot of opportunities for movements for these bodies that did not exist previously. Because oil was always put in US dollars. Because there was control over operational setups, movements, whatever setup relevant to what was happening in Venezuela, right? So the control was there, the leverage and power was there, and the money. So therefore, oil, to trade it, had to be put in US dollars. Therefore, everyone had to do that. Now, with the introduction of BRICS, that is no longer the case. There's an alternate system that does not require people to bend and invite the US to the table. There's where some of the anxiety, I believe, comes in, right? Because now you're not inviting me into the room and you saying you don't got to put it in my money, which means you go, bump me out of what a financial system, out of an opportunity, and start to find ways to wiggle around whatever I was trying to do. So kind of thinking about it this way, if an oil trades without requiring dollars, the demand for the U.S. currency kind of drops, right? So some of that leverage, like, oh, you need our dollar, right? That starts to shift. And when the demand, I was talking economics, when there's a adjustment to the demand, right? That can weaken the overall economic system because we know how supply and demand goes, right? So I believe that is where the anxiety is coming from. It's not just always the oil. It's so much deeper than the oil itself. It's so much deeper than that, y'all. It is so much deeper. It's not just about the oil. Oil is the vehicle, but currency is the cargo. That's what's moving, baby. So you got control of the oil dictates the terms of the world's most traded commodity. Because what is that hot girl? And all of that, for those who are more visual who want to see that, that's how that would go. Control the currency, you can control the trade, you control power, because what that's all leverage is, it's all moving, it's all moving, it's all moving. And when you can understand the relationships, that's why I want to explain this through the lens of relationships. We understand the relationship between all these things. You see why they was anxious. You see why there's such a level of like aggression and like movement. I just also wanted to do the complete picture, right? Because we talked about who gets to control what and how all that goes. Governance, force, and legal like authority. You can see it right here. Is the lack of clear legal justification for actions, the absence of like transparent authority claims, executive actions preceding public explanation, right? We like stuff is popping off. We like, hey, just finding out stuff by way of Twitter, you know. It's been quite a bit. There were some things that occurred that actually seemed to be in violation or to be in conflict, rather, with things that were in United Nations Charter. I want to say it's like Article 2 or something like the D1, but don't quote me on that part. Article 2, I feel actually pretty comfortable with. But there are certain things that must occur, right? For you to make certain claims the way that certain things were saying, like you would have to say that it's either self-defense because something happened, like you popped off, they did something to me, I'm responding, I had the right to defend myself. Or you have to say that it was authorized, right? It was approved by the United Nations. And those two things didn't occur. And then additionally, even within that was like the international structure, right? And then from a internal perspective, based off the way our stuff is written, there would need to be some level of something that was approved through Congress saying like, yeah, we understand, we support, we agree with that. People like, oh, the president just do what everyone. Not actually. There are rules to everything. And according to our own internal structure, that was not appropriate. So when I say like that was a problem, like several of the events that occurred relevant to Venezuela recently. There's so many things that keep happening. I don't want to specifically outline one. I need to come back and later just want to say like relevant to that, right? There are rules and guidelines, and for someone to move outside of what international guidelines state should occur, and even their more domestic rules that should occur, there has to be some type of concern, right? Something that is pushing the needle of anxiety to say, no, we need to respond to this immediately. We need to assert ourselves, right? Because you're scared of losing power. What you're going to do, you're going to kind of over assert yourself. not say that you would per se, but I'm saying people generally have a tendency to over-assert themselves. When we think about the 48 laws of power, sometimes we talk about assuming power, right? Until you actually might have it. So I might be like, hey, y'all taking the power and authority away from me. I'm going to over-assert myself so that you fear me. So then you're giving me the power back that I feel like I should have in a room, in a situation. Okay. So then we might say, what guidance might have led to them saying, hey, because even with that being said, there's still so many rules and structures around who should be able to do what, how, when, where, whatever, right? What would give you the audacity, the unadulterated audacity to do something like that? Okay, right. What would give you the audacity to do something like that? What would give you the audacity? Okay, so now we're about to talk about that. But before we can slide right into that piece, I just want to have one other element. The president, the tone, right? When I'm talking about some of the things that happen to go say, I'm gonna go just while somebody is asleep with their significant other. My team, this is what was in the press conference. My team said we was gonna wait. We've been planning this for months. So even though they was discussing stuff, it don't matter. I planned it for months to go snatch this person out of some safe space that they were in with their significant other and bring them into our country because I feel like they violated something. Not to say the person did violate something, but that particular approach to it doesn't align with what was stated internationally as to how you handle those kind of situations. Additionally, we wouldn't want somebody doing that to our elected officials. And in general, I don't think anybody would want that. It's just very uncomfortable. It sets a really interesting tone, and it blurs lines about boundaries about what you can and should not do when interacting with other bodies, right? So you got to think, like I said, what would give someone the comfort to be that audacious? And this is where I'm going to take us to Project 25, right? I'm going to take us to Project 25 and say, they say, oh, it don't exist. Oh, it's a Project 25 listed Venezuela 18 times. I went into my phone. I went to books. Went into my phone. Right, and looked it up. So just to give you a point of reference, if you go look up Project 25, I do have it listed in the community section. You can go check out. It's a direct link, a static version. I'll make a static version of this PowerPoint. You can look through at your pleasure. But it's listed 18 times. 18 times. Additionally, I just wanted to put United Nations was also either 18 or 19 times. Let me look. It's 18 times as well. Right? Now, I have a Project 25 tracker, and I'll dive in deeper later because I won't keep you longer than I already have. But this is the ombudsman section, right? And this is pretty much the issue. This is the language that is proposed by Project 2025, the kind of action. So this lets me know if this was an executive action or if this was like a Congress action. So once again, I want to try to understand, was this executive branch or was this our legislative branch? Who did it, right? And honestly, as far as legislation for 2025, I believe they sent 75, things to the president. He vetoed like 2 or 3 of them. So it's like either 72 or like 73 things that were put into law. So that's easier, in my opinion, to track. I have that on there as well. And there's over 100 plus executive orders, right? I almost want to say it was close to 200, but don't quote me on that particular number. But I can be quoted for the one for what the legislatively put into law. So just being mindful of that, because there's lots of executive orders and there were several executive actions that happened. So I put a tracker to kind of map how much of this is mapping back to Project 25, and you would be surprised to know that. Let me pull my number out real quick. I wanted to say it was like 35 that was like completely completed. And then there were like, I want to say 70% was actually, let me just pull this piece. Right, so 30% was formally executed, somewhere between 60 to 70% was functionally implemented, and nearly all sections were operational, right? Nearly all sections of that Project 25 were operational. Stay tuned on my channel, because I'm telling you, I will be showing you all of it, and I'll start making links. And guys, I want to show y'all, because I've been building up this database that I can kind of, play with by way of Excel and like Google. So it's take me a second because that's a lot of information. But yeah, when you see these are hyperlinks to executive orders, to the bills, yes, I'm linking it all. I'm taking notes of executive actions because it's quite significant. You would be surprised to see how much maps directly back. But when we ask the question, what would give you the audacity? You would be surprised how much you can find that support certain activities in Project 25, which is not a directive, but it is guidance, right? You would be surprised. But when you see the events that have occurred, just know that this was decades of decision making. This was decades of conflict that happened. It was not an overnight thing. Because, as a just general person who honestly is much sociology and history I've had throughout my life, no one spent the time to explain these details to me, this history to me. I had no way of really knowing. So I looked at it and said, why would you do it? There is, when you look at it on paper, it's like there's no reason that makes sense to why you would do something like this. It has to be something behind it. It has to be something behind it. Oil is that girl. Oil makes you the hitter in the room, right? And when someone's threatening your power over something, right, they say, okay, well, you don't got control over it like that. And matter of fact, and because you don't got control of that, we don't have to put the money in your form of currency, because why? What do I need to invite you to the table? I don't even want you to the table no more. Matter of fact, we're going to have this whole other thing, and we're going to make money moves all around you, because oil was the biggest trading commodity, right? Well, we're going to put it in a different form. There actually is even an executive order relevant to like a currency that was put out, I want to say around January, February of last year. But we'll dive into all that during another video. I'm just telling y'all, baby, when I tell you we be getting into these receipts over here, sometimes it might take me some time to put all this stuff together, because I want to put it in a visual display so y'all can have it to look at it, go about it. So y'all wanted to pull all public information, so I have to pull a certain kind of resources a certain kind of way. But trust and believe, we get into them receipts, we be eating over here. This is going to be in its own playlist. I will put this in two separate playlists that I have. It will go under comparative law, because I'm actually showing some different things relevant to different countries. But this will also fall under the Venezuelan playlist. Eventually, once I have enough content, I will convert this over into a course so people can go step by step with the different pieces, because there's lots of content that I've been covering with regard to Venezuela. But I just wanted to say, I appreciate all of you all so much for following along with my content, staying engaged, liking the videos. We already have 50 subscribers, 50 plus subscribers. We have over 13 countries that have been tuning in. That surmises the 30% of the grouping that have been supporting my content, and you guys have been supporting me since day one. I've been tracking the analytics. I appreciate you all so much. It's 6,000 unique viewers, almost 25,000 views, in less than 2 months. You guys have my heart incredibly full. I appreciate that you enjoyed this content this much. I really didn't know it would get this level of support this early. But I thank you all so much as I have been compiling and getting to these receipts. I thank you all so much for all your support, all of the people within the nation who have been supportive, different states. I want to say like the first 7, you guys were on it the first 72 hours while I was still being verified. You all were just sending my stuff through WhatsApp, and it said group me and emails and all kinds of stuff. It just tells me like where they've been sent and all that in Facebook. I appreciate you all so much for staying tuned to my content and just sharing, because I want to do civic literacy and I want to make it accessible. They say that resources are accessible, it's out in public domain, but it's not easily digestible. And I don't like that part. I want it to be accessible and digestible. And I want it to be something you can reference and come back to. So thank you so much. And when I say thank you so much, I really do mean that from the very bottom of my heart. I have so much gratitude for the support that you all have been showing me, and know that I will continue to do this more. I look forward to doing more lives with you guys and getting to these receipts a little bit quicker. I have been recording in a different format and structural setup. I will be doing more on live so that you have an opportunity to ask me questions, so we can interact, and also that you can get a full setup. The Project 25 document that's up right now is a little bit blurry because I just took a picture of it as a PDF. But next time I'll actually put it up on the screen and we'll kind of click through and we'll be able to look at things. But I would love for you guys to kind of get into the chat, tell me what you want to see. And if I already have those kind of things mapped out, I will certainly make it accessible. Once again, this is Adrian from Legally Everywhere. We are looking into everything. Thank you so much for spending your evening with me. And I will give you back the remaining of your time. See you in the next video, because we get into these receipts. Okay, and tell me I didn't come with these receipts today. Because listen, I gave y'all a whole PowerPoint like I'm a professor up here. Thank you so much. See you in the next video.